Hi, my name's Mary, and this is Rose. Our 7-year-old Rosie is deaf and hard of hearing. Our family was aware that Rosie would have unique developmental and medical needs from the time I was pregnant. We are a family that are hearing, and Rosie would be our only child that is deaf. Rose did surprise me in that I was aware it could be a possibility with her diagnosis, but I didn't really think that would be our concern or our issue. And I found out very early on it was. And it has actually been a beautiful experience learning alongside her more and more about ASL, the deaf community, and all the resources that are there for her. Having a deaf and hard of hearing teacher for Rose before she was 3 was huge. All my other children are hearing. And, I was coming from a standpoint of every sound a baby can hear, talk to your baby, ask your baby questions, and this really helps them develop. And I was in a place of grieving. I can't even do that for Rose. Rose has all these other challenges, and I can't even sing the lullabies. And honestly, that didn't last long. I learned really quick. I absolutely need to sing the lullabies. I absolutely can still ask Rose questions. But a teacher was a huge help. I'm still learning. I still am very green in my signing, but I sign every day, all the time, to my daughter. And I couldn't imagine if that wasn't a part of her education. I know that she is thriving for many reasons, but she's developing and loving her school. And I know that it's due to deaf services being incorporated into her IEP.
I am the mother to 2 children. I have one hearing daughter who is 5 years old and one deaf daughter who is 3 years old now. So my second daughter was born with bilateral microtia and atresia. So it was obvious at the time of birth that she would probably have a hearing difference. There is no opening to her ears and they are much smaller. I feel they are adorable. I really didn't like the response and kind of misinformation I was getting from doctors and hospitals and things that they really push on you when you have a baby. Um, and surgery was very much at the only options they were giving me, and that wasn't my concern with, a brand new baby. And I kind of was wanting to know more, and no one would tell me if it was an actual health concern or this was cosmetic or if there even was a hearing difference or if she was deaf or anything like that. No one would tell me anything. So we go home with this precious little baby and a lot of questions. So the first kind of people to reach out were Oakland Unified School District with the Early Start program. And they were the first people to call me and say, "Hey, do you have a newborn baby with hearing loss?" And I was like, "I don't know, do I? Like, no one's told me anything." But I do have a newborn baby, and she has microtia and atresia, and I think that's what they're called. And I really had nothing. I didn't even know if I pronounced it right. They didn't even want to tell me what the diagnosis was in the hospital. They told me I would, get appointments later, which was very dismissive and irritating. So Early Start program was the first people to reach out. They helped me kind of understand everything from the ground up. And at that time, they actually didn't have a full staff as they do now. There was, a speech language pathologist, and then also some like people acting as teachers of the deaf with the early start 0 to 3. Lots of complicated things, but overall we were like very supported, and I felt that they were our only real sense of understanding of anything. Will anybody willing to break it down to us and tell us our actual options and what to expect and what to look for and games and lots of different things. Really, my first aha moment was even the initial phone call of wow, like someone's finally calling me, telling me what's even going on. Um, so that was my first kind of experience with them. And then as it continued, they helped us. We got like hearing devices, like a Baha on a headband that my daughter wears. So they helped us with that and what to expect the audiology, ling sound practices. And then I kind of made it clear to them speech wasn't my only focus. And I was kind of catching on that that's not always the case with a lot of microtia and atresia families, and I didn't know how to find that. And I knew that she should be having sign language. I knew it like in my gut. So once I kind of made that clear, I was more interested in sign language and ASL and what that looks like for her and for us. They were very supportive, and I wish that was the case with more families, but we were lucky enough to be in that situation. So they let me know, we were entitled to a deaf mentor or deaf coach and what that would look like. And, I really wanted to go that direction. So they did, they supported me with that. We got our deaf coach. It was amazing. It was super life-changing. She actually had microtia and atresia on one side herself. So I finally felt like, oh my gosh, somebody to help us understand. I mean, the resources were endless. I mean, you could talk about resources for each holiday of signs we would learn, activities to do with your deaf child, what to expect, when your options, your rights as parents, your IEP rights, your IFSP rights, how to go through meetings. I mean, what education options can look like for your family. All of these just incredible conversations we got to have with sometimes our deaf coach and then the team or everybody together or brainstorming with one and then filling the team in. It's there's no words to describe how important early start and early intervention was to our family and still is.
Hi, my name is Will Furtman. I'm the father of 2 boys, one hearing and one deaf. Hearing one is now 11 and the deaf one is 7. When my younger son was born, my wife and I were really surprised. He was identified in the newborn hearing screen and we just didn't know what to do. We didn't know sign language and we didn't really have any idea about what kinds of help or education were available for our family or for him in particular. Early on, though, we decided that the best people to ask about how to raise a deaf child were deaf adults. And we lucked out because our local deaf services agency had a deaf coaching program. And through them, we were able to meet coaches who had been deaf children themselves and who could give us solid advice. Not just about raising our deaf son, but also about helping our hearing son adapt to new circumstances, a new way of communicating in a new language in the house. Honestly, I was just so worried about my baby's future that I cried when I first met our deaf coach. She was this really smart, sweet, funny woman, and she loved my kid. And it was a huge relief to meet somebody who didn't see him as some sort of problem or project. He was just a baby to her and a baby with a bright future. And that just meant everything to me. Our family's actually had more than one deaf coach over the years. I mean, they were all different. One of them was just a total jet setter. She would come meet with us in between trips to Caribbean islands and Africa. She would tell us all her adventures while we practiced our sign language together. I mean, it really just opened our eyes to what our son's life could be like one day. It was really incredible. We had another deaf coach who was specifically a buddy for our hearing son. He was just a cool young person that he could hang out with and play games with. And that was really helpful to give our son, some confidence with his ASL and confidence in dealing with deaf folks, including his brother. So our son has cochlear implants. He's bilaterally implanted, and they've worked out well. He hasn't had any problems with them, and it's given him a lot of access to spoken English. But we decided that we also wanted to learn ASL, and that's been just a huge help. We never worry about communication with our kid. We never worry that he's not hearing things at school because he goes to the deaf school and he gets instruction in a language we know he can understand. It's just such a help to have ASL, even if your kid has good access to sound with technology. I mean, what I would tell families is to find the deaf community, however you do it, in whatever way. There's no hearing teacher, there's no social worker, no hearing person can really replace that experience. Nobody's going to know what being a deaf child is like a deaf adult.
Hi, so my daughter is 7 years old. She attends a California School for the Deaf. She's in first grade. She was born with Charge syndrome, so she's considered DeafPlus. So she'll have vision issues along with being deaf. So she's technically deafblind. We moved from Seattle to CSD Fremont just for this program, and I highly recommend it if you're looking at it. But my advice to any parents with DeafPlus kids is that you have to be their biggest advocate. You really can't let up for a second. You can't immediately trust anyone to make sure they're making the right decisions for your child. So you really have to stay on your P's and Q's. I know that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but there are a lot of politics involved that are beyond your control at first. There are politics involved with deaf culture and DeafPlus individuals, and there are politics involved in school districts and the interplay between school districts and deaf schools. So my advice is educate yourself, make sure you're not just taking the first offer of services, or if they're not giving you the services you need to just fight, just keep fighting.
Hi, my name is Kristen Stratton, and I'm here to share today a little bit about our journey through Early Start. I'm a mom of 3 children. I have a hearing daughter who's in high school. I have a hard of hearing son who is in 8th grade, and I have a son who is DeafPlus, and he is homeschooled and is in 6th grade. I'm actually a hard of hearing adult myself, and my children who are deaf are actually the 4th generation in our family to be diagnosed with a hearing loss. But we are the first in our family to choose American Sign Language. So when my youngest son was identified as deaf, my older son, who is hard of hearing, had not yet shown any signs of hearing loss, because in our family, our hearing loss is progressive and shows up at different times. So my youngest son, who is DeafPlus, he was receiving lots of medical intervention related to his other developmental delays and his other disabilities. And because we knew hearing loss ran in our family, we were also proactively pursuing audiology and hearing tests. And when he was around 18 months old, he was diagnosed as having a severe bilateral hearing loss. So our story is a little different because none of my children were found to have hearing loss at birth. I was not found to have hearing loss at birth. In all of our cases, hearing loss was identified later on in infancy, or in my case and in the case of my hard of hearing son, we were both 5 years old when we were identified with hearing loss. Even though I had a hearing loss, I never had early intervention. I never had speech therapy. I never had an IEP or a 504 plan. In fact, I never even had hearing aids until my first set of hearing aids was given to me by the Department of Rehabilitation when I entered college. When we realized my son was deaf in addition to other disabilities, we decided that it was going to be really important to make different choices. And one of those choices was to make sure that no matter what, language was always going to be accessible. So we made the decision to choose to incorporate American Sign Language, regardless of whether or not our children chose to accept technology, whether that was hearing aids or cochlear implants eventually. We always wanted to make sure our children had access to a visual language, because that was something I didn't experience, and so that very much shaped my own decision. My son, who's DeafPlus, has a severe bilateral hearing loss that's now progressed to severe to profound. When we were in the early intervention process, things were very chaotic for us. That's very common with the DeafPlus experience. It's because navigating the systems, the medical systems, the early intervention systems, the educational systems, if you're transitioning into the school district during that time, it's all very overwhelming if you've never had experience with it before. So I had to learn very quickly how to parent this child that was very different from my older two. I had to learn a whole new system, a whole new vocabulary, and I'm also trying to recover from childbirth, trying to navigate my postpartum journey, trying to navigate sleepless nights, and figure out this child who needs a lot from me, and I don't understand what I'm doing. And that was a very overwhelming and uncomfortable experience as a mom. When we were in early intervention, we initially were not paired with a deaf and hard of hearing specialist. In fact, it was only because I got on Google and I searched deaf and hard of hearing programs, early intervention. And when I found that our local county office of education had an early intervention program for deaf and hard of hearing students, I asked my regional center, hey, why aren't we providing this for my son? And then we had an IFSP meeting and changed providers to a teacher of the deaf. That is when I realized, oh, there's a whole specialized team to work with people like my son. And boy, did I learn a lot after that. I realized that there was so much I didn't know. So I dove into books and I talked to anybody and everybody I could. I joined local support groups. I got involved with nonprofit organizations for families and parents. And I realized there was so much that I needed to learn so that I could be the best parent I could be. But that was really overwhelming, while still trying to make sure my child stayed alive, stayed healthy, had all his basic needs met. It wasn't just about getting access to language or listening and learning. There was a lot of medical considerations and health considerations along the way that made everything a lot more difficult, but also a lot more rewarding when we figured those things out. We did also eventually privately hire a deaf coach. We didn't realize that we could have asked for that to be funded through regional center or through the school district until many thousands of dollars were sacrificed personally to make that happen. I wouldn't go back and change any of that though, because it was worth the time and money spent to invest in our family. But it's good to know now that that is an available resource to families, and I encourage any family who can ask for those things, because it is so important to have the deaf community and deaf adults, especially a DeafPlus adult, in the life of your child.